Alright, so when I did my video about education requirements for police that you can see up here, I got a surprising number of questions about drug testing and disqualifiers when you're testing to work for a police department. Now, I don't want to put anybody's name out there. A lot of people ask very specific questions about very specific things from their past and timetables and history and juvenile offenses versus adult offenses and arrests and expungements and all sorts of stuff. But I'm going to cover a very broad level of the topic of drug testing, prior drug use, convictions, and other disqualifiers when you're looking for a job in law enforcement. Where are you going? Get out of the way! So let's start off with some things that are going to get you disqualified pretty much anywhere you look for a job as a police officer, correctional officer, sheriff's deputy, anything like that. If you come in during the interview process when they do the pre-hiring drug screening and you piss hot, you're not getting hired. I mean, almost everywhere you're not getting hired. So you kind of have to study for the drug test. But studying for the drug test isn't just for the 72 hours or 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever the piss tests are good for now. A lot of places do the hair test. And when I took the employment test with the Chicago Police Department many years ago, they had guys that would come in the week after we did the drug test, because they did it on a weekly thing. You do one thing 1 week, one thing another week, one thing another week, because they were going through thousands of applicants. People would come in the week after the drug test, and they'd all be doing the walk of shame out past this big long line of applicants out the front door of the police academy. Now, when they did that test, of course, all of these people were probably assuming they were going to do a urine test, and they hadn't smoked weed in like 3 months or whatever, because they knew the Chicago Police Department test was coming up. And when we came in for the test, they did a hair sample, and the hair is good for like a couple years or something like that. It's a long time back. So it should go without saying, but apparently it's a problem out there, that if you're using some type of illegal drugs on a regular basis, just stopping a couple months before you take the police test is not going to keep you from being disqualified. And if you come in piss hot or your hair comes back hot during the hiring process, you're not going to get hired. That's a disqualifier. And even if the drugs aren't illegal in the state where you're at, which is another big question that I get is, well, I'm from a state where it's legal, yada, yada, yada. Even in states where recreational use of marijuana is legal, oftentimes there is an exception in the law that says it's not legal for police officers, so that way they can still regular drug test police officers. And on your application, it's going to ask you if you've ever been arrested or convicted for any offense, and it's going to ask if you're a regular user of narcotics, and it's going to ask if you've ever smoked weed. It's going to ask you all those things. And if you say one thing on your application and another thing comes back on the drug test, you're done. Police departments can't stand liars, and it's always easier to forgive a mistake of the mind than it is the mistake of the heart, right? If you put on your application one thing and then we find out another thing later, that's a mistake of the heart. You didn't just make a mistake and forget about that time you were convicted for selling narcotics, or that you forgot that you smoked weed 3 months ago. I mean, clearly you know you did it. That's not something that people take lightly when they're going to test for a police department job, and you lied on it. So you might not necessarily get disqualified because of the drug use in your past all the time. It might be because you lied about it on the application, which is where they get most people's lying about stuff in the application process. If we can't trust you to tell the truth on the application, then how do we trust you out on the street to not steal and not abuse your authority? Now, in that same vein, if you lie about anything on your application, that's also a disqualifier. It's not just drugs or convictions or anything else. If you lie about your credit score, if you lie about your prior addresses, if you leave something out, that many places, when you do the application, they tell you, fill out every box, and any box that you don't have any information to put in, put NA through for not applicable. So if you put in a box that it's not applicable, and it is applicable, you lied. And you get fired for that. That happens all the time to people. Now, when you go beyond that into all of the individual questions about, well, what if I had a juvenile conviction for possession? What if I had a juvenile conviction, or I didn't have a conviction, I had an arrest for selling drugs when I was 14 and on the street, but I've turned my life around and I'm 28 now? Or what if I got a ticket for weed in an area where it's not a criminal offense? Or what if I was in another country where smoking weed or doing hash or whatever is legal? Do I still have to disclose that on the application? And will that automatically disqualify me? Well, here's the thing. That is different every place you go. And what's a disqualifier at every place is going to be different. I'll tell you a few stories that'll kind of illustrate my point here. I applied for a police department many years ago, and one of the questions was, have you ever been in a fight since you've turned 21? And I put down yes. And then I came in for the interview process with a psychologist, and they asked me about it. I said, well, yes, I was a security guard, and there was one time when I was a security guard that somebody was trying to steal, and a fight ensued. We were trying to get handcuffs on him, and a bunch of us had to fight this guy in handcuffs. Disqualified. Disqualified. I never had a problem with it any other police departments that I've talked to, that I've gone to, but for this place, having ever been in a fight after the age of 21 was an automatic DQ. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of places that I've talked to, and the place that I work, having been in a fight in the course of your official duties, when you were a security guard or a cop somewhere else or a correctional officer, somewhere where it's your job to fight with people, or if you were a boxer or an MMA or something like that, that wasn't a disqualifier. That's actually seen as kind of a plus. Okay, this person has experience. They know what they're getting into coming to the rough area that they're going to be working in. Another disqualifying story that it kind of surprised me that this was a DQ for a place, but it was a nice suburb, very high pay, and they suddenly had a problem with prostitution in their town. So unbeknownst to this guy that I know, he came in to do the testing, and he filled out their little questionnaire, and they asked him about all the different stuff. And during the interview process, or during the psych, it wasn't me, it was somebody else. During the psych, they asked somewhere in there, have you ever paid for a sexual favor? And he put down yes. So of course they asked him about that, and he says, well, I was at a bachelor party. We were in Nevada, and I paid this stripper $10 to lick whipped cream off of her. Now, never mind the fact that in Nevada, at the time, and given the circumstances, that was completely legal. He could have paid that stripper, a couple $100 and probably had sex with her legally where he was at. But it didn't matter that it was legal where he was at the time. It was a DQ in that town because they considered that something that they didn't want any of their police officers to have done. They considered that to be a disqualifier. Again, we go back to the difference between the heart and the mind, and the broad difference between police agencies when you're looking for a job at them. So the major parameters I give people with whether they think they're going to be DQ'd from a job or not when they ask a particular question about that is the time since whatever it was occurred. If you were 13 and something happened, it's a whole lot different than if you were 23 and something happened and now you're 24, 25 looking for a job. And it's an enormous difference between if you were 14 or 15 and you got a criminal offense, or if you're 14 and 15 got a ticket and it gets found out during the background check, and now you're 30 transferring from one agency to another. That's an entirely different thing that's going to be looked at differently by a background investigator. The other is the seriousness of the offense. If you're 18 and get locked up for selling narcotics, it's going to look different than if you're 18 and locked up for selling weed, or if you're 18 and locked up for possession of weed. And that's going to be looked at entirely different from if you're 23 and you just got arrested for possession of marijuana, and now 6 months later you're testing for a police department. But there's so broad a spectrum, it's hard to tell what's going to be a DQ offense and what's not, what's going to be an automatic DQ in a background and what isn't going to be. There are places where marijuana is completely legal, and you could go there and use recreational marijuana, and then you come back home to a place that it's not legal, and you go to test for a police department, and they say, have you ever used marijuana? And you're like, yeah, 2 months ago, but it was legal where I was at. And they go, no, we don't. On our policy, it says there are no drug users are allowed to be on our police department. And here's another thing to think about with disqualifiers, especially in relationship to drugs. Even if you're at a place where there are laws and rules and whatever else, union contracts or whatever else in place to keep your agency from randomly drug testing you or drug testing you as a result of some on-the-job performance, if something happens to you on the job, let's say you get in a rough car accident or a shooting or something like that, and you end up getting transported to the hospital, they're going to pull blood. And if you come back hot for something that you're using while you're on the job, even if it's something that the police department can't use against you because of some contractual issue or because of state law or whatever, some lawyer is going to subpoena that information from the hospital, and when it comes to a civil suit, that's going to come out that you are using marijuana or heroin or whatever else. So my advice pertaining to people who are trying to get a job in law enforcement and they're wondering about what's going to be a DQ and about drug testing and any of that is study for the drug test, which means if you're 14 now and you've never used anything before, don't. It's not that hard. Just don't. I mean, if you're serious about getting into it, don't go trying drugs. It's just easier, and then You're not going to have any problem with the drug testing, polygraph, background investigation, any of that. They're going to go talk to people and be like, no, this kid goes to church every Sunday and he's not into anything. And if you've used some sort of narcotics in the past and now you're getting your life on track and you're trying to get into a job in law enforcement, don't start using them again. Stop now. The earlier you stop doing whatever it is you're doing that you think might be a disqualifier, the better chance you have of it not being a disqualifier. Now, when it comes down to crimes of moral turpitude, most places have those as disqualifiers. So if you have a background for, let's say, aggravated battery, you hit somebody over the head with a hammer when you're an adult, you're probably DQ'd. If you've got something for stealing or lying or a perjury conviction, you have a perjury conviction as a cop, you can't be a cop anymore. So there's lots of crimes that you could commit that you get arrested for or convicted for that are automatic disqualifiers. And that's something else I should probably mention, is that you don't necessarily have to be convicted of something for it to be a disqualifier on a police department background check. They're pretty persnickety about it, and a good background investigator is not just going to talk to you and the people that you give as references doing your background investigation. They are going to talk to you, and then they're going to talk to the people that you give as references, and then they're going to have those people that you give as references give to other people that also know you. And they're going to go talk to those people and see what they have to say about you. And they're going to go talk to your neighbors, and they're going to talk to people across the street. If you're in school, they're going to go talk to your instructors or professors or teaching assistants, anybody else that they know has had recent contact with you that they can get a hold of. They're going to talk to them, especially if you're looking for a job on the federal level. I mean, they get right up in there on the federal level and investigate the living crap out of everybody that they're going to hire. And any little thing might be a disqualifier. You're not going to know in advance. So if you're looking for a job in law enforcement, keep your nose clean, study for the drug test, and don't get yourself in any type of weird shenanigans that you're going to have to explain away later. And if you already have, stop doing those things and start showing signs that you're going to turn your life around, like I was talking about in the education video. Get a good job, get some education, get some life experience, and the more time you put between those bad things in your past and what you're doing now, the easier it is for someone doing a background investigation or making a hiring decision to say, hey, you know what, it's been 10 years, this guy's good, or it's been long enough, or maybe that wasn't a harsh enough offense for us to worry about it. But if you keep doing what you're doing and try to find some way to skirt around the drug testing or background investigation, it's not going to work. And the place that you end up working that allows you to skirt through their background investigation by playing games, it's not a place you're going to want to work anyway. They're probably not going to pay very well, and you're going to be surrounded by other people who also skirted the background investigation. Who wants to work with a bunch of idiots? If you guys like this type of content and the message it sends about law enforcement, it helps you out with trying to get a job or understanding how police work, background investigations, all the other stuff we talk about here works, you should check me out on Instagram and also check out my Patreon page. Patreon is where you can make a small donation to see the videos in advance. This video is being shot probably over a month before when I'm actually going to release it to the public, and you could have seen it probably 2 or 3 weeks ago if you were one of my Patreon supporters. Also, you should check out Tier 1 Firearms. They are one of our supporters. The links are all down in the description below. Till next week, you guys be safe. Take care of each other. I'd like to thank all the Patreon supporters, and especially the shift supervisor level Patreon supporters that we have listed here. Your contributions are what allows free field training to continue on and become better. Thank you.